the maid who stood against the millionaire and left applauded for her courage. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the Whitmore mansion in Beverly Hills, California. Maria Santos adjusted her uniform one last time before beginning another day in what many would consider paradise, but what she had come to know as a beautiful prison. At 52, Maria had worked as a housekeeper for wealthy families for over 20 years, but nothing had prepared her for the Whitmore household. Richard Whitmore, tech mogul and real estate magnate, owned a sprawling estate that overlooked the city like a modern-day castle. His wife, Catherine, spent her days at charity galas and spa appointments, while their teenage daughter Emma seemed more interested in her phone than anything happening around her. Maria moved through the house with practiced efficiency, her weathered hands polishing surfaces that already gleamed. She had immigrated from El Salvador 15 years ago, leaving behind her own family to provide for them from afar. Every month, she sent most of her earnings to her mother and younger sister back home, keeping just enough to survive in her small apartment in East Los Angeles. "Maria!" Richard's voice boomed from his home office, sharp and demanding. She had learned to recognize the different tones in his voice. This one meant trouble. She made her way to the office, where Richard sat behind his mahogany desk, his silver hair perfectly styled despite it being only 8 in the morning. His designer suit probably cost more than Maria made in 3 months. "Yes, Mr. Whitmore?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "The Hendersons are coming for dinner tonight. I want this place spotless. And I mean spotless, Maria. Mrs. Henderson has a keen eye for detail, and I won't be embarrassed in my own home." Maria nodded. She had already planned to spend the day deep cleaning, as she did before every dinner party. "Of course, sir. Is there anything specific you'd like me to focus on?" Richard's eyes narrowed. "Everything. And Maria, about your situation with your sister. I know you've been distracted lately with her medical bills. I need you focused here. This is your job, not playing nurse to family back in whatever country you came from." The words stung, but Maria kept her expression neutral. Her sister Carmen had been diagnosed with diabetes and couldn't afford her medication. Maria had been working extra hours whenever possible, taking on additional cleaning jobs on weekends to help pay for Carmen's treatment. "I understand, Mr. Whitmore. My work here has always been my priority." "Good, because there are plenty of people who would love to have your position. Don't forget that." As Maria left the office, her hands trembled slightly. She had heard variations of this threat countless times over the past 3 years. Richard Whitmore wielded his wealth like a weapon, using people's desperation against them. She knew she was trapped. She needed this job, and he knew it. The day passed in a blur of activity. Maria scrubbed, polished, and arranged everything to perfection. She prepared the guest bedrooms, cleaned the already spotless bathrooms, and made sure every surface in the expansive kitchen gleamed. By evening, her back ached and her feet throbbed, but the house looked immaculate. As the Hendersons arrived, James Henderson, a prominent city councilman, and his wife Patricia, a socialite known for her sharp tongue, Maria retreated to the kitchen to oversee the catering staff. From there, she could hear the conversation floating in from the dining room. "Richard, you've outdone yourself with this place," James Henderson's voice carried. "The service here is impeccable. How do you manage to keep such good help?" Richard's laughter was cold. "It's simple, James. You find people who are desperate enough, and you remind them of their place. Take my housekeeper, for instance. She knows that without this job, she'd be back to whatever hole she crawled out of. Fear is a wonderful motivator." Maria's hands stilled on the dish she was washing. She had suspected Richard talked about her this way, but hearing it confirmed felt like a physical blow. "That's brilliant," Patricia Henderson chimed in. "And these people need to understand they're lucky to work for families like ours. They should be grateful, not demanding." "Exactly," Richard continued. "I pay her well enough to keep her quiet and compliant. She knows I could have her replaced tomorrow, and her entire family back in El Salvador would suffer. It's beautiful how effective financial pressure can be." The other guests laughed, as if Maria's struggles were entertainment for their dinner conversation. She felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had endured worse than cruel words, but somehow hearing her life reduced to a source of amusement for these wealthy people felt particularly degrading. As the evening wound down, and the guests prepared to leave, Maria busied herself clearing the dining room. She moved invisibly around them, as she had learned to do, present enough to serve, invisible enough to be ignored. "Maria," Richard called as she gathered the last of the plates. "Make sure to have the cars brought around for our guests." "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. But as she walked toward the kitchen, she heard Patricia Henderson's voice, deliberately loud enough for her to hear. "Richard, dear, You might want to have her ears checked. She seems to be getting slow in her old age. Maybe it's time for a younger model." The guests erupted in laughter again, and Maria felt something inside her chest tighten. She had spent years absorbing these small humiliations, telling herself it was worth it for the steady paycheck, for her family's security. But tonight, something felt different. Tonight, the words seemed to echo in her mind long after the guests had left. As she finished cleaning up, Maria caught sight of herself in the hallway mirror. Her reflection showed a woman aged beyond her years. Shoulders curved from decades of bending to other people's demands. When had she become so small? When had she allowed herself to disappear so completely? The house fell quiet around midnight. Richard and Catherine had retired to their separate bedrooms. Their marriage was another perfectly polished facade. Emma was probably scrolling through social media in her room, and Maria was alone with her thoughts and the echo of cruel laughter. She walked through the silent mansion one last time, turning off lights and checking locks. In the moonlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the house looked even more like a museum than a home. Beautiful, cold, and empty of any real warmth or humanity. As she gathered her purse and sweater to leave, Maria's phone buzzed with a text from her sister Carmen. "Maria, the medication is working. I feel stronger every day. Thank you for everything you sacrifice for our family. I love you." Reading those words, Maria felt something shift inside her chest. She thought about the conversation she had overheard, about Richard's casual cruelty, about the way these people saw her as nothing more than a convenient tool for their comfort. Tomorrow, she decided, something was going to change. Chapter 2. The Breaking Point. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching Maria's mood as she unlocked the back door of the Whitmore mansion. The house felt different somehow, as if the previous night's conversation had left a residue of cruelty hanging in the air. She went through her morning routine mechanically, starting the coffee, reviewing Catherine's schedule, checking the household inventory, but her mind kept returning to Richard's words. "You find people who are desperate enough, and you remind them of their place." Around 10 o'clock, Catherine emerged from her bedroom suite, already dressed in designer yoga wear that cost more than Maria's monthly rent. "Maria, I need you to cancel my spa appointment and reschedule it for Thursday," Catherine said without looking up from her phone, "and pick up my dry cleaning. The pink dress needs to be ready for the charity luncheon tomorrow." "Of course, Mrs. Whitmore," Maria replied. Catherine paused, studying her with the detached interest of someone examining a household appliance. "You look tired, Maria. Are you getting enough sleep? I can't have you looking haggard when we have important guests." The casual dismissal of her humanity, the assumption that her fatigue was somehow an inconvenience to Catherine, rather than a sign of overwork, made Maria's jaw tighten. "I'm fine, ma'am. Just a long week." "Well, make sure you get some rest this weekend. We have the Blackstone party next Tuesday, and I need you at your best." As Catherine click-clacked away in her expensive heels, Maria realized that even the woman's attempts at concern were really about how Maria's appearance reflected on the family. She wasn't seen as a person with her own needs and struggles, but as an extension of the household's image. The morning progressed with its usual parade of trivial but urgent demands. Emma needed her designer uniform taken to the cleaner because she had spilled coffee on it. Richard required his office reorganized because he couldn't find a contract that was exactly where he had left it. Catherine insisted the flowers in the foyer be replaced because they were looking droopy after only 2 days. By noon, Maria's patience was wearing thin. She was in the kitchen preparing lunch when she heard raised voices from Richard's office. Through the partially open door, she could see him on a video call with what appeared to be his business partners. "The zoning approval is taking too long," Richard was saying, his voice sharp with frustration. "We need that low-income housing development stopped. It's going to kill property values in the area." Maria's hands stilled on the sandwich she was making. The development he was talking about was in her neighborhood, affordable housing that would help families like hers. "I don't care what it takes," Richard continued. "Pay off whoever needs to be paid off. These people don't deserve to live anywhere near decent neighborhoods anyway. Let them stay in their ghettos where they belong." The cruelty in his voice was casual, matter of fact. To him, the displacement of working families was just another business transaction. "Maria," he called suddenly, "bring me lunch in here, and make sure the coffee is hot this time." She prepared his meal with shaking hands, her mind reeling from what she had overheard. Richard wasn't just cruel to his employees, he was actively working to harm entire communities of people like her. When she entered his office with the tray, Richard was still on his call, gesturing dramatically as he spoke. "The problem with these people," he was saying, "is they don't know their place. They think they deserve the same things as everyone else. Someone needs to remind them that the world has a natural order." Maria set the tray down carefully, but Richard held up a finger, indicating she should wait. "My housekeeper is here," he said to his call participants with a smirk. "Perfect example of what I'm talking about. Hard worker, knows her role, doesn't cause trouble. That's how it should be. He looked directly at Maria as he spoke, and she realized he wanted her to hear this. It was another reminder of her place, another way of keeping her in line. These people can be quite useful when properly managed, he continued. The key is making sure they understand that their security depends entirely on your generosity. Fear of deportation, fear of losing their income, fear for their families. It's all very effective. One of the voices on the call chuckled. Richard, you're terrible, but effective. Indeed. Now, Maria, he turned to her with a patronizing smile. Is there anything you need to say? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Maria felt every muscle in her body tense. She understood what he was doing, displaying his power over her for his colleagues, demonstrating how completely he controlled her. For 20 years, she would have simply said, "No, sir," and retreated, but something about this moment felt different. Maybe it was her sister's text the night before, or the conversation she had overheard about the housing development, or simply the accumulation of 1,000 small humiliations. Actually, yes, Maria said quietly. Richard's eyebrows rose in surprise. This wasn't the script they usually followed. I was wondering, Maria continued, her voice growing stronger, how you sleep at night, knowing that your wealth comes from making other people's lives harder. The room fell completely silent. On the video call, she could see the shocked faces of Richard's business partners. Richard himself looked as though she had slapped him. "Excuse me," he said, his voice dangerously low. "You heard me?" Maria replied, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "I've worked for you for 3 years, and I've watched you treat people like they're disposable. Your employees, your community, even your own family. You think money gives you the right to look down on everyone else. Maria, you're overstepping." "No, Mr. Whitmore, I'm finally speaking up. You talk about people like me as if we're not human beings with families and dreams and dignity. You use our struggles against us, and you laugh about it with your friends." Richard's face was turning red. "How dare you? How dare I what? Tell the truth. You're so used to everyone being afraid of you that you've forgotten some of us have backbones." The silence that followed was deafening. Maria could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of the moment settling around them like dust after an explosion. Richard slowly ended his video call, never taking his eyes off Maria. When he spoke, his voice was like ice. "You're fired. Get out of my house. Now." Maria nodded, feeling strangely calm. "I'll get my things. You have 5 minutes. And don't expect a reference. I'll make sure no decent family in this city ever hires you again." As Maria walked toward the service quarters to collect her belongings, she heard Richard making phone calls, his voice sharp with anger. She knew he would follow through on his threats. She knew she had just destroyed her financial security and possibly her family's future. But for the first time in 3 years, she felt like she could breathe. Chapter 3. The confrontation word of Maria's firing spread quickly through the network of domestic workers in Beverly Hills. By the next morning, she had received calls from 3 other housekeepers, all expressing solidarity but also fear. Richard Whitmore's influence in the wealthy circles of Los Angeles was well known, and his vindictive nature was legendary. Maria spent the day in her small apartment, trying to figure out her next steps. She had some savings, but not enough to last long, especially with Carmen's medical expenses. She began calling agencies, looking for temporary work, but Richard's prediction proved accurate. Word of her insubordination was already circulating. On Wednesday morning, she received an unexpected call from Jennifer Walsh, a reporter for the Los Angeles Tribune who covered social justice issues. "Mrs. Santos, I heard about what happened at the Whitmore house. Would you be willing to talk to me about your experience working for wealthy families in Beverly Hills?" Maria hesitated. Speaking to a reporter would mean burning bridges permanently. But as she thought about Richard's casual cruelty, about his plans to destroy affordable housing, about all the other domestic workers who suffered in silence, she found herself saying yes. They met at a small cafe in Maria's neighborhood, far from the gleaming towers of Beverly Hills. Jennifer was a young woman with kind eyes and a notebook full of similar stories. "You're not the first person to come forward about Richard Whitmore," Jennifer explained. "I've been investigating labor practices among wealthy households for months, but most people are too afraid to speak on the record." "I understand why," Maria said. "When you depend on these jobs to survive, speaking up feels impossible. What made you decide to take that risk?" Maria thought about the question. "I think it was hearing him talk about my life like it was a game to him, about how he enjoyed having power over desperate people. I realized that staying silent wasn't protecting me, it was protecting him." Over the course of 2 hours, Maria told Jennifer everything: the impossible standards, the casual racism, the deliberate humiliation, the threats about deportation and unemployment. She talked about other domestic workers she knew who had similar experiences but were too afraid to speak up. "There's something else," Maria added. "He's actively working to block affordable housing developments. He sees people like me as problems to be contained, not human beings with the right to decent lives." Jennifer's eyes lit up. "Can you prove that? I overheard several phone calls. I don't have recordings, but I remember details." They agreed that Jennifer would verify the information independently before publishing anything. As they parted ways, Jennifer squeezed Maria's hand. "What you're doing takes incredible courage," she said. "I hope you know that." The article appeared online Thursday morning and in print Friday. The headline read, "Behind Closed Doors, Domestic Workers Expose Culture of Abuse in Beverly Hills." Maria's story was prominently featured, with her real name and photo at her insistence. The response was immediate and explosive. By noon, Maria's phone was ringing constantly, other domestic workers sharing their stories, activists offering support, and lawyers asking if she wanted to pursue legal action. But there were also threatening calls, people telling her to go back where she came from, and worse. The story went viral on social media. Justice for Maria began trending, with thousands of people sharing their own experiences of workplace abuse and discrimination. Celebrities and politicians weighed in, praising Maria's courage and calling for investigations into labor practices among the wealthy. But the real test came on Saturday afternoon, when Maria learned that Richard Whitmore was scheduled to speak at a charity gala at the Beverly Hills Hotel, a fundraiser for children's education that would be attended by the city's elite and covered by local media. Maria made a decision that surprised even herself. She was going to attend. The Beverly Hills Hotel buzzed with activity as Los Angeles's wealthiest citizens gathered for the annual Children's Future Foundation Gala. Maria stood outside in her best dress, a simple black outfit she had worn to church for years, watching the parade of designer gowns and expensive suits. She had no invitation, no plan beyond a determination to face Richard on equal ground, in public, where his wealth couldn't shield him from the truth. Security at the entrance was tight, but Maria had learned something from her years in domestic service. If you act like you belong somewhere, people often assume you do. She walked confidently through the lobby, following a group of well-dressed donors into the ballroom. The room was a vision of luxury: crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, elaborate floral arrangements. Maria recognized many faces from the houses where she and her friends worked. These were the people who lived in mansions maintained by invisible hands, who attended charity galas while treating their own employees like disposable objects. Richard was at the head table, resplendent in a custom tuxedo, accepting congratulations for his generous support of children's education. The irony wasn't lost on Maria, a man who wanted to deny housing to working families being praised for caring about children. She found an empty chair at a table near the back and waited. Her heart pounded, but her resolve remained steady. When Richard rose to address the crowd, she knew her moment had come. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began, his voice carrying easily through the sound system. "I'm honored to support the Children's Future Foundation because I believe every child deserves opportunity, regardless of their background." The applause was enthusiastic. Maria watched the crowd. These people genuinely believed they were philanthropists, heroes investing in the future while remaining blind to their own role in perpetuating inequality. "However," Richard continued, "we must be realistic about the challenges facing our community. Not everyone is capable of rising above their circumstances. Some people are content to remain in positions of service, and there's nothing wrong with that. The world needs people willing to do humble work." Maria's hands clenched in her lap. Even at a charity event, Richard couldn't resist his subtle expressions of superiority. "The key," he went on, "is maintaining proper boundaries between different classes of society. When everyone knows their role and stays in their lane, the system works beautifully for everyone." That was the moment Maria stood up. The movement caught Richard's attention, and his eyes widened in recognition. A murmur rippled through the crowd as people noticed the disruption. "Mr. Whitmore," Maria called out, her voice clear and strong, "I'd like to ask you a question." Security began moving toward her, but Richard held up a hand, his expression curious. Perhaps he thought this would be an opportunity to publicly humiliate her. "Of course," he said with a cold smile, "though I'm not sure this is the appropriate venue for employment disputes." The crowd chuckled nervously, but Maria didn't flinch. "This isn't about employment," she said, walking closer to the front of the room. "This is about humanity. You just spoke about children deserving opportunities regardless of their background, but you actively work to deny housing to working families. You treat your employees like they're less than human. How do you reconcile those two positions?" The room fell silent. Richard's smile faltered slightly. "I'm sorry, but I don't think you understand the complexities of urban development." "I understand perfectly," Maria interrupted. "I understand that you profit from keeping people desperate. I understand that you laugh about it with your friends. I understand that you see people like me as objects to be used and discarded." She had reached the front of the room now, facing Richard across the distance of just a few feet. The contrast was stark: the powerful millionaire in his designer tuxedo, and the middle-aged housekeeper housekeeper in her simple dress. "You want to talk about people knowing their place," Maria continued. "Let me tell you what I know about my place. My place is standing up for dignity. My place is speaking truth to power. My place is showing other working people that we don't have to accept cruelty as the price of survival." The room was completely quiet now. Many attendees looked uncomfortable, perhaps recognizing themselves in Maria's words. "You fired me for telling the truth about how you treat people," she said. "You tried to destroy my reputation to protect your own, but the truth has a way of coming out, doesn't it?" Richard's face was flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Security, please escort this woman." "No," said a voice from the crowd. A woman in an elegant blue gown stood up. "Let her speak." Then another voice, "She has a right to be heard." And another, "This is important." Maria felt a surge of strength as she realized she wasn't alone. The crowd was divided, but many faces showed support and recognition. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "you have more money than most people can imagine. You live in a house that could shelter 20 families. You attend galas like this one and receive praise for your generosity. But real generosity isn't just writing checks for charity galas. It's treating the people who work for you with respect. It's recognizing that dignity isn't determined by the size of someone's bank account." She paused, looking around the room at faces that ranged from hostile to sympathetic to thoughtful. "I worked in your house for 3 years," she continued. "I cleaned your floors, prepared your meals, maintained the luxury you take for granted, and not once did you treat me like a human being with worth and value. You saw me as a tool to be used, threatened, and discarded." "That's not true," Richard began. "It is true," Maria said firmly, "and everyone in this room knows it, because most of you treat your employees the same way. You give money to charity to feel good about yourselves while ignoring the suffering you cause in your own homes." The silence stretched on. Maria could see tears in some eyes, anger in others, and calculation in still others as people weighed her words against their own behavior. Finally, she spoke again, her voice softer but no less powerful. "I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking for recognition. Recognition that every person, regardless of their job, their income, their immigration status, deserves to be treated with basic human dignity. That's not radical. That's not political. That's just right." As Maria finished speaking, something unexpected happened. One person began to clap, then another, and another. The applause spread through the room, growing louder and more sustained. Not everyone participated, but enough did that the sound filled the ballroom. Richard stood frozen at the podium, his face a mixture of rage and humiliation. Security was moving toward Maria again, but she held up her hand. "I'm leaving," she announced. "But I want everyone here to remember this moment. Remember that the people who clean your houses, tend your gardens, and raise your children are human beings with stories and struggles and dreams. They deserve your respect, not your contempt." As Maria walked toward the exit, the applause continued. People stood up, many with tears in their eyes. She had done something that seemed impossible. She had made the invisible visible, given voice to the voiceless, and demanded dignity in a room full of people who had forgotten what the word meant. Outside the hotel, Maria breathed deeply of the cool evening air. Her phone was already buzzing with calls from reporters, activists, and supporters. The confrontation would be all over social media within hours, but more importantly, she had kept a promise to herself. She had stood up, she had spoken truth to power, and she had done it with courage, dignity, and grace. Chapter 4. The Ripple Effect. The video of Maria's confrontation with Richard Whitmore spread across social media platforms like wildfire. Shot by several attendees on their phones, the footage showed Maria standing with quiet dignity as she faced down one of Los Angeles's most powerful men. Within 24 hours, "Thus Maria Stands" had replaced Nan's "Justice for Maria" as the trending topic, with millions of views and shares worldwide. Maria woke Sunday morning to find reporters camped outside her apartment building. Her phone had died overnight from the constant stream of calls, texts, and notifications. When she finally plugged it in, she discovered hundreds of messages from strangers offering support, job opportunities, and financial assistance. Among them was a call from someone she hadn't expected, Emma Whitmore, Richard's 17-year-old daughter, Ms. Santos. Emma's voice was shaky when Maria called her back. I wanted to apologize for my father, for my family, for how we treated you." Maria was surprised by the call, but also touched by the young woman's courage in reaching out. "Emma, you don't need to apologize for your parents' behavior." "But I do," Emma insisted. "I saw how he talked to you, how my mother treated you like you were invisible. I should have said something. I should have stood up for you. You were a child in your parents' house. That's not your responsibility. I'm not a child anymore. And after seeing that video, Miss Santos, you were so brave. You said things that needed to be said. I want to be that brave too." Their conversation continued for nearly an hour. Emma revealed that she had often felt uncomfortable with her family's treatment of their staff, but had never known how to address it. Maria's courage had inspired her to speak up. "I'm writing a letter to the newspaper," Emma said, "about what it was really like in our house, about the things my father said when he thought no one was listening. Emma, think carefully about this. Your father won't react well, I know, but you risked everything to tell the truth. The least I can do is support you." Emma's letter appeared in the Los Angeles Tribune Tuesday morning. Written with the honesty that only comes from youth, it detailed years of casual cruelty and systemic abuse within the Whitmore household. She described overhearing her father's racist comments, witnessing her mother's condescending treatment of the staff, and feeling ashamed of her family's behavior. The letter created another media storm. A wealthy teenager turning against her own family to support her former housekeeper was unprecedented. Richard Whitmore issued a statement calling his daughter confused and manipulated by outside influences, but the damage was done. Meanwhile, Maria found herself at the center of a movement she never intended to start. The Los Angeles Domestic Workers Alliance, an organization she had never heard of, reached out to ask her to speak at their upcoming rally. Labor lawyers offered to represent her pro bono in any legal action against Richard. A GoFundMe page, started by strangers, had raised over $50,000 for her family's medical expenses. Most surprisingly, she began receiving calls from other wealthy families, not offering criticism, but job opportunities. Dr. Sarah Chen, a prominent pediatrician, called personally to offer Maria a position managing her household. "I saw what you did at that gala, Dr. Chen said. "I've been looking for someone with integrity to help run my home, someone who isn't afraid to speak up when something isn't right. Dr. Chen, you should know that Mr. Whitmore has promised to make sure I never work in Beverly Hills again." "Richard Whitmore doesn't speak for all of us," Dr. Chen replied firmly. "There are plenty of families who believe in treating employees with respect and dignity. We've just been quiet about it for too long." The job with Dr. Chen came with better pay, reasonable hours, health insurance, and most importantly, respect. But Maria also found herself with a new responsibility, speaking engagements at organizations across the country that wanted to hear her story. Her first major speech was at the Los Angeles Convention Center, addressing a crowd of 2,000 domestic workers, labor activists, and community supporters. Standing at the podium, where she had once only dreamed of having a voice, Maria felt the weight of representing not just herself, but thousands of invisible workers. 6 months ago, she began, I was afraid to ask for a day off to take my sister to the doctor. I thought that speaking up would cost me everything. And in some ways, it did. I lost my job, my security, my comfortable silence. But I gained something more valuable, my voice. The crowd erupted in applause, but Maria raised her hand for quiet. This isn't about one bad employer or one brave moment. This is about a system that allows people to be treated as less than human because of their job, their accent, their immigration status, or their bank account. Every day, in houses across this city and this country, hardworking people are subjected to humiliation, discrimination, and abuse because they need their jobs too much to fight back. She paused, looking out at the faces in the crowd, many of them domestic workers like her, others supporters and activists, but we don't have to accept that anymore. We don't have to choose between dignity and survival. When we stand together, when we support each other, when we refuse to be invisible, we have power. The speech was interrupted by standing ovations 3 times. Videos of it were shared millions of times across social media platforms. Maria Santos, the housekeeper who stood up to a millionaire, had become a symbol of resistance against economic inequality and workplace abuse. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. 2 weeks after the convention speech, Maria received a package with no return address. Inside was a handwritten letter and a check for $10,000. The letter read, Dear Ms. Santos, you don't know me, but I employ 2 housekeepers and a gardener. After watching your speech online, I realized I've been treating them like servants rather than employees. Your courage made me look at my own behavior, and I didn't like what I saw. I've given my staff raises, provided health insurance, and most importantly, started treating them like the skilled professionals they are. The check is for your sister's medical expenses, but also as a thank you for helping me become a better person. You may never know how many lives you've changed by standing up that night, but please know that your courage is creating ripples far beyond what you can see. With deep respect, a reformed employer. Maria sat in her new apartment, larger and brighter than her old place, paid for with speaking fees and donations, and thought about the journey that had brought her here. 6 months ago, she had been invisible, powerless, afraid. Now she had a platform, a voice, and most importantly, hope. Her phone rang. It was Carmen, calling from El Salvador. "Maria, I saw your speech on YouTube. Our whole village watched it together. Everyone is so proud of you. How are you feeling, Carmen? How's your treatment going?" "Much better. The doctors say my levels are stable. But Maria, that's not why I'm calling. I want you to know something." "What's that?" "When we were children and our father left, you promised you would take care of our family. You kept that promise by working so hard, by sacrificing so much, but you did something even more important. You showed us that dignity is worth fighting for, that no one has the right to make us feel small." Maria felt tears welling up in her eyes. Carmen continued, "You didn't just stand up for yourself that night. You stood up for all of us, everyone who has ever been made to feel invisible or worthless. You reminded the world that every person has value." After ending the call, Maria walked out onto her balcony and looked out over the city. Somewhere out there, Richard Whitmore was probably plotting his next business deal, probably still angry about the housekeeper who had dared to challenge him, but he no longer had power over her life. Somewhere else, domestic workers were going home after long days, maybe feeling a little stronger because they had seen one of their own stand up and survive. Maybe some of them would find their own voices, their own moments of courage. The ripple effect was spreading, one person at a time, one moment of courage inspiring another, and it had all started with a simple decision: to speak the truth, even when it was dangerous, even when it was costly, even when it seemed impossible. Maria had learned something that night at the Beverly Hills Hotel. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right, despite the fear. And sometimes, when one person stands up, the whole world stands a little taller. Chapter 5. New Beginnings. 6 months after the confrontation that changed her life, Maria Santos stood in the California State Capitol building, preparing to testify before the Senate Labor Committee. The Domestic Workers' Bill of Rights, legislation inspired partly by her story, was being debated, and lawmakers wanted to hear from someone who had experienced workplace abuse firsthand. As she waited her turn to speak, Maria reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her here. From invisible housekeeper to national advocate seemed impossible, yet here she was, about to address state senators about protecting the rights of domestic workers across California. The hearing room was packed with supporters, domestic workers, labor activists, and allies who had been fighting for these protections for years. Maria also noticed several well-dressed individuals she recognized as representatives of wealthy households, there to oppose the legislation. When her name was called, Maria approached the microphone with the same quiet dignity she had shown that night at the Beverly Hills Hotel. The room fell silent as she began to speak. "Senators, my name is Maria Santos. 8 months ago, I was just another invisible domestic worker, cleaning houses and staying quiet. Today, I stand before you not just as one person, but as the voice of thousands of workers who deserve basic protections and dignity." She looked directly at the committee members as she spoke, her voice steady and clear. "The Domestic Workers' Bill of Rights isn't asking for special treatment. We're asking for the same protections that other workers take for granted. The right to overtime pay, the right to meal breaks, the right to be free from discrimination and harassment. Most importantly, we're asking for the right to be treated as human beings." Maria went on to describe her experience with the Whitmores, the systematic abuse she had endured, and the fear that kept her silent for so long. She spoke about other domestic workers she knew who had faced similar treatment, but were still too afraid to come forward. "When I finally spoke up," she said, "I lost my job, but I gained something more valuable: my voice, my dignity, and the knowledge that silence in the face of injustice only protects those who profit from that injustice." The committee members asked thoughtful questions, and Maria answered each one with the wisdom she had gained from months of speaking to workers, advocates, and policymakers across the state. After her testimony, as she walked through the Capitol hallways, Maria was approached by Senator Patricia Rodriguez, the bill's primary sponsor. "Ms. Santos, your testimony was powerful. I think you may have changed some minds in there today." "I hope so, Senator. But even if this bill passes, the real work happens in individual homes, one relationship at a time." "Speaking of relationships," Senator Rodriguez smiled, "I have something to tell you. Richard Whitmore's development company just lost their bid for the downtown luxury project. The city council cited concerns about their labor practices and community impact." Maria felt a complex mix of emotions. She had never wanted revenge against Richard, but she was glad that his actions were finally having consequences. "What matters more," she said, "is that other employers are changing how they treat their workers. That's the real victory." As Maria left the Capitol building, she thought about how different her life had become. Her work with the Domestic Workers Alliance had grown into a full-time position as their lead organizer. She was helping other workers find their voices, negotiate better conditions, and know their rights. Her sister Carmen had recovered fully and was now studying to become a nurse, inspired by Maria's courage to pursue her own dreams. The money from donations and speaking fees had not only covered Carmen's medical expenses, but also allowed Maria to bring her mother to visit California for the first time. But perhaps the most meaningful change was personal. Maria had discovered that standing up for herself had taught her how to stand up for others. Every day, she received calls from domestic workers facing abuse, discrimination, or exploitation. Sometimes she could connect them with legal help or better job opportunities. Other times, she simply listened and reminded them that they weren't alone. One afternoon, as Maria was leaving her office at the Alliance, she received a call that surprised her. It was from Jennifer Walsh, the reporter who had first told Maria's story. "Maria, I have something I think you'll want to know. Emma Whitmore just graduated from high school early and got accepted to Stanford. She wants to study social work." "That's wonderful," Maria said, genuinely pleased. "She's a brave young woman. She also asked me to give you a message. She said to tell you that she's starting a scholarship fund for the children of domestic workers who want to go to college. She's calling it the Maria Santos Courage Scholarship." Maria felt tears spring to her eyes. That a wealthy teenager would use her privilege to help the children of workers like Maria was beyond what she had ever imagined possible. Later that evening, Maria sat in her comfortable apartment, video calling with Carmen and her mother back in El Salvador. The contrast with her old life was stark. No longer was she exhausted at the end of each day. No longer did she feel small and powerless. "Maria," her mother said through the screen, "your father would be so proud of you. You've become the woman he always knew you could be." "Mama, I'm just doing what feels right. That's exactly what makes us proud. You could have stayed silent, stayed safe, but you chose to risk everything for what was right. That's real courage." After the call ended, Maria walked out onto her balcony and looked out over the city lights. Somewhere out there were thousands of domestic workers going home after long days. Some of them feeling stronger because they knew someone like them had stood up and survived. Some of them were planning their own moments of courage, their own decisions to speak up. The movement Maria had accidentally started was growing. New chapters of the Domestic Workers Alliance were forming in cities across the country. The California bill looked likely to pass, and other states were considering similar legislation. More importantly, she was hearing from employers who were voluntarily improving conditions for their workers, inspired by her story to examine their own behavior. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Chen, her current employer. "Maria, thank you for the wonderful job you did preparing for tonight's dinner party. Your attention to detail and professionalism never ceased to amaze me. Have a restful weekend with your family." It was a simple message, but it represented something revolutionary. An employer who saw her as a skilled professional deserving of respect and recognition. This was what Maria had been fighting for all along, not just for herself, but for every worker who had ever been made to feel invisible. As she prepared for bed, Maria reflected on the question that reporters often asked her: "Do you regret confronting Richard Whitmore that night?" The answer was always no. That moment of courage had cost her a job, but had given her a life. It had cost her security, but had given her purpose. It had cost her anonymity, but had given her a voice that could speak for those who had none. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more workers to help, more stories to tell, more battles to fight for dignity and justice. But tonight, Maria Santos slept peacefully, knowing that she had kept faith with the scared housekeeper she had once been, and with the thousands of workers who still needed someone to stand up for them. The maid who had stood against the millionaire had discovered something that Richard Whitmore's wealth could never buy: the power that comes from knowing your own worth and having the courage to demand that others recognize it too. In her dreams that night, Maria saw a world where every worker was treated with dignity, where courage was contagious, and where standing up for what's right was not the exception but the rule. It was a world worth fighting for, one voice at a time, one act of courage inspiring another, and it had all started with a simple decision: to speak the truth, even when it was dangerous, even when it was costly, even when it seemed impossible. Dear viewers, Maria's story reminds us that courage doesn't require wealth or power. It just requires the decision to stand up for what's right. Her journey from invisible housekeeper to national advocate shows us that every voice matters, every person has dignity, and sometimes one moment of bravery can change everything. If Maria's courage has touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from around the world. Your support helps us share more stories like this, stories that remind us of our shared humanity and the power we all have to make a difference. Remember, you might be just one person, but your voice, your courage, your stand for justice could be exactly what the world needs right now. Thank you for watching, and remember, be the courage you want to see in the world.